The scent of bergamot and old money clung to the air like a warning I should have heeded. My wrists ached where the silk restraints bit into my skin. Decorative, expensive, but no less chains for their elegance. The velvet cushion beneath my knees had gone numb an hour ago, but I remained perfectly still on the marble platform, eyes downcast as I'd been instructed. Salerno's elite didn't like their merchandise to make eye contact. Through my lowered lashes, I could see polished Italian leather shoes moving across the obsidian floor. Ermenegildo Zegna, Berluti, Testoni. I'd learned to recognize luxury in the 2 weeks since my parents had explained my purpose. Since my father had looked me in the eye and told me I was worth more as a transaction than as a daughter. Lot 17. The auctioneer's voice echoed through the underground chamber of the Palazzo Carnevale. His Neapolitan accent made even this degradation sound civilized. Amalia Moretti, 23 years old, university educated, fluent in Italian, English, and French. Virgin, as verified by Dr. Santoro. Heat burned my cheeks at the clinical recitation of my body's inventory. The murmur of male voices swelled around me, assessing, calculating, pricing my worth in euros and power and whatever currency monsters used when they traded in human flesh. I'd stopped crying 3 days ago. Tears accomplished nothing in this world I'd been sold into. Better to observe, to learn, to understand the rules of this game even as I was being wagered. The bidding started at 50,000 euros. My father's gambling debts exceeded 2 million, but apparently I was only worth a fraction of what he'd lost at cards and dice and desperate deals made in back rooms with men who collected on debts with bone and blood. 75,000. 100. The voices competed, disembodied in the shadows beyond the spotlight that pinned me like an insect to this platform. I recognized some of them. Roberto Esposito, who owned half of Naples's shipping ports. Carlo Benedetti, whose pharmaceutical empire ran through South America. Men I'd seen at my parents' dinner parties, who'd smiled at me over champagne and caviar while planning this moment. 150,000. The bid came from my left, a voice I didn't recognize. Deep, controlled, with an accent that placed him somewhere north. Maybe Florence or Milan. I risked a glance toward the sound. Mistake. The auctioneer's assistant, a rail-thin man named Enzo, stepped forward and struck my shoulder with a wooden rod. Not hard enough to bruise where it would show, but sharp enough to remind me of my place. "Eyes down," he hissed. "The merchandise doesn't look at buyers." I dropped my gaze, but not before I'd seen him. Tall, perhaps 6'3", in a navy suit that looked hand-stitched and probably cost more than my father's debts. Dark hair swept back from a face that could have been carved from the same Carrara marble as Michelangelo's David, all sharp angles and classical proportions. But it was his eyes that had arrested me in that brief glimpse. Steel gray, cold and calculating, examining me the way an architect might study a building before deciding whether to restore it or tear it down. 200,000. His voice again, cutting through the others with quiet authority. No one else bid against him. 300,000. Roberto Esposito, sounding annoyed. 500,000. The gray-eyed stranger, his tone unchanged, as if he were ordering espresso, not buying a human being. Silence fell over the chamber. 500,000 euros was more than most men paid for their mistresses, their wives, their futures. For me, a girl whose only value lay in the prestigious surname my family had squandered. It was absurd. "Going once," the auctioneer said, his voice trembling slightly with excitement at the commission this would bring him. 1 million. A new voice entered the bidding. I recognized this one. Marco Castellano, a name whispered with fear even in Rome's highest circles. My stomach clenched with fresh terror. Whatever fate awaited me with the gray-eyed stranger, Castellano's reputation promised worse. 2 million. The gray-eyed man spoke with the same flat certainty, and I heard something in those two words that made my skin prickle. Not desire, not lust. This was something colder, more purposeful. He wasn't buying me because he wanted me. He was buying me because he needed me for something. No one bid higher. At 2 million euros, I'd exceeded my father's debts by a comfortable margin. Somewhere in the shadows, I knew my parents were watching, relieved. Their gambling problem solved, their social standing preserved, and all it cost them was the daughter they'd never particularly wanted anyway. Sold, the auctioneer declared, to Signor Glauco de Laurentiis for 2 million euros. De Laurentiis. The name sparked recognition even through my fear. I'd heard it before, whispered in the same breath as words like architect and untouchable, and the man who builds empires and buries enemies. But that couldn't be right. Glauco de Laurentiis was a legitimate businessman, a renowned architect who'd designed half of Italy's modern luxury hotels. Why would such a man be here, in this underground auction, buying... Stand. Enzo's command cut through my spiraling thoughts. My legs had gone numb from kneeling. I struggled to rise, wobbling on the absurd heels they'd forced onto my feet. Before I could fall, a hand gripped my elbow. Strong, steady, proprietary. Glauco de Laurentiis had crossed the distance between us in silence. Up close, he was even more imposing than my glimpse had suggested. The scent of him, something woody and complex, probably custom blended, enveloped me as he steadied me on my feet. "Walk," he said quietly, his voice pitched for my ears only. "Don't stumble. Don't show weakness. These men feed on fear." It wasn't kindness that motivated his instruction, I understood. It was the same instinct that had driven him to pay 2 million euros for me. I was his now, his property, and in this world, a man's possessions reflected his power. A stumbling, terrified girl would make him look weak. I lifted my chin and walked beside him through the gauntlet of wealthy predators, their eyes following me with varying degrees of disappointment and calculation. My parents weren't among the visible crowd, of course not. They'd arranged this sale through intermediaries, maintaining plausible deniability, even as they spent the money my body had earned. The night air hit me like a slap when we emerged from the palazzo's private entrance. October in Salerno carried the salt-sharp scent of the Mediterranean, so different from the stale incense and expensive cologne that had saturated the auction chamber. A black Mercedes S-Class waited at the curb, its engine purring. Glauco opened the rear door himself, his hand still firm on my elbow as he guided me inside. The leather seats were butter-soft, heated against the evening chill. He slid in beside me, close enough that I could feel the warmth radiating from his body, and the driver pulled away from the curb without needing instruction. We drove in silence for 5 minutes before I found my voice. "Where are you taking me?" "Home." He didn't look at me, his attention fixed on the passing streets as Salerno gave way to the winding coastal road. "I don't have a home anymore," I said, the bitterness I'd been swallowing for 2 weeks finally surfacing. "My parents made that quite clear." "No," he agreed, his tone clinical. "You don't. But I do. Villa Neapolis. You'll live there." Villa Neapolis. I'd heard of it. Everyone on the Amalfi Coast had. The impenetrable fortress that Glauco de Laurentiis had built on the cliffs above Positano, all glass and steel and architecture so modern it looked like it had been carved from the future. No one entered without invitation. No one left without permission. "As what?" I asked, needing to understand the terms of my captivity. "Your mistress? Your servant? Your... What am I to you?" Finally, he turned to look at me. In the dim interior of the car, his gray eyes were unreadable, but I felt the weight of his assessment like a physical touch. "You're a tool," he said simply. "A very expensive, very specific tool that I've been searching for 20 years to acquire." The honesty was worse than a lie would have been. At least a lie would have implied I mattered enough to deceive. "What do you need me for?" My voice came out smaller than I'd intended. "Revenge." The word fell between us like a blade. "Your surname is Moretti. Your grandfather was Lorenzo Moretti. Your father is Antonio Moretti. Do those names mean anything to you?" I nodded slowly. "My grandfather died before I was born. Some kind of business rivalry that went bad. My father never spoke about it." "No," Glauco said, his voice dropping to something darker, more dangerous. "I imagine he wouldn't. It's difficult to explain to your daughter that her grandfather was responsible for the massacre of an entire family. Difficult to mention that the blood money from that betrayal built the comfortable life she's enjoyed for 23 years. Ice spread through my veins. "I don't understand." "You will." He turned away from me again, his profile sharp against the window as the Mediterranean glittered in the moonlight beyond. "My parents, my 2 brothers, my sister, all dead because Lorenzo Moretti sold our family's location to our enemies for 3 million euros. You cost me 2 million, Amalia. A bargain considering what your bloodline owes mine." The casual cruelty of the mathematics took my breath away. My life, quantified and compared to deaths that had occurred before I was born. Debts I hadn't incurred, passed down through blood and surname like original sin. "I had nothing to do with that," I whispered. "No," he agreed. "But you're a Moretti, and in my world, family debts are inherited along with everything else." He finally looked at me again, and something in his expression made my pulse race with a fear more visceral than anything I'd felt in the auction chamber. "You'll live in my home, Amalia. You'll eat at my table, wear clothes I provide, exist entirely within my control. And when the time comes, you'll stand exactly where I place you and serve the purpose I bought you for." "Which is?" His smile was cold, calculated, absolutely certain. "Bait." The Villa Neapolis rose from the cliffs like something conjured from stone and spite. Floor-to-ceiling windows reflected the dawn breaking over the Mediterranean, turning the entire structure into a mirror that threw the sun back at itself defiantly. As our car wound up the private road, the only access point I noted, flanked by security cameras and men whose suits couldn't quite hide their weapons, I understood that Glauco hadn't just built a home. He'd constructed a fortress designed to keep the world out and his possessions safely trapped within. "Beautiful, isn't it?" His voice held a note of pride that hadn't been present during our earlier exchange. "I designed every detail myself. 3 years of planning, 2 years of construction. The structure can withstand a Category 5 hurricane, a 7, 5 magnitude earthquake, and a coordinated assault by up to 20 armed men." "You sound like you're expecting all 3, I said, my exhaustion making me reckless. "I'm expecting worse." He gestured as we passed through wrought iron gates that closed automatically behind us. "But they'll never reach you. These walls have never been breached." The casual inclusion of me in his security calculations should have been comforting. Instead, it reinforced what he'd already made clear. I was a possession to be protected, not because I mattered, but because losing me would represent a failure of his defenses. The driver, a silent man who'd been introduced simply as Tommaso, pulled the Mercedes into an underground garage that housed a collection of vehicles worth more than most people earned in a lifetime. A silver Maserati, a black Lamborghini, several motorcycles that looked designed for speed rather than comfort, and, incongruously, an old Fiat 500, lovingly restored, its cherry red paint gleaming under the garage's lights. "My mother's car," Glauco said, following my gaze. "The only thing that survived the fire." I wanted to ask about the fire, about the massacre he'd mentioned, about the 20-year vendetta that had led him to purchase me like livestock. But something in his expression as he stared at that restored Fiat warned me against it. Some wounds were too fresh to probe, even 2 decades later. An elevator carried us from the garage to the main floor, its mirrored walls reflecting us back at ourselves. Him composed and controlled in his perfect suit. Me disheveled and exhausted in the ivory dress they'd forced me into for the auction. My wrists still bearing the faint marks from the silk restraints. The villa's interior was as stunning as its exterior. Minimalist furniture in shades of cream and gray, artwork that I recognized from auction catalogs, a Caravaggio, a Modigliani, pieces worth millions displayed casually on walls designed to showcase them perfectly. Everything positioned with architectural precision, every sightline calculated, every shadow intentional. "Arya will show you to your room," Glauco said as a woman appeared from one of the hallways. She was perhaps 50, with steel gray hair pulled into a severe bun and eyes that assessed me with the same critical precision Glauco had shown. "You'll bathe, rest, and eat. Tomorrow, we begin your education." Education in what? In how to survive here. He was already turning away, dismissing me. In the rules of silence that govern this house. In the role you'll play when I choose to deploy you. And if I refuse to play along? The question stopped him mid-step. He turned back slowly, and the look he gave me was colder than anything I'd seen in the auction chamber. "Then you'll discover that the 2 million euros I paid for you wasn't a purchase. It was an investment. And I protect my investments with every resource at my disposal. Your parents sold you, Amalia. They took my money and signed papers that transferred all legal guardianship to me. As far as Italian law is concerned, you're my dependent, my ward, my responsibility." His smile was thin and sharp as a blade. "You can cooperate and make this easier on yourself. Or you can resist and learn exactly how creative I can be in enforcing compliance. But either way, you're mine now. The only variable is how much you suffer in the process." The casual brutality of it rendered me speechless. Arya stepped forward, her hand gentle but firm on my elbow, the same proprietary touch Glauco had used, a reminder that even the servants here understood I was property to be moved and positioned as needed. "Come, signorina," she said, her Neapolitan accent softening the command slightly. "You need rest." I followed her because I had no other choice, down a hallway lined with more expensive art, past rooms whose purposes I could only guess at, until she opened a door and gestured me inside. The bedroom was larger than my entire apartment in Rome had been. A king-sized bed dominated one wall, dressed in linens that probably cost more than my university tuition. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a view of the Mediterranean so beautiful it hurt to look at. The perfect prison, I realized. Bars made of beauty, rather than steel. "The bathroom is through there," Arya indicated a door. "I've drawn you a bath. There are clothes in the closet, all in your size. Signor De Laurentiis is very thorough in his preparations." How did he know my size? The question emerged before I could stop it. Arya's expression remained neutral. "Signor De Laurentiis knows everything about everyone who enters his life. It's how he's survived this long." She left me alone, and I heard the soft click of a lock engaging. I crossed to the door and tried the handle, locked from the outside. The windows were next, but when I examined them, I found they were sealed, designed to let in light and view, but not to open. Emergency fire codes probably mandated they could be broken in crisis, but doing so would certainly trigger alarms. The bathroom offered no escape either, though I lingered there longer than necessary, soaking in water so hot it turned my skin pink, watching the silk restraint marks on my wrists fade to nothing, washing away the auction house's stale air, the touch of hands that had examined me like merchandise, the shame of standing on that platform while men calculated my worth. The clothes in the closet were exactly my size, as Arya had promised. Simple but expensive. Cashmere sweaters, silk blouses, tailored trousers, several dresses that looked designed for someone who needed to look elegant, without drawing too much attention. everything in shades of cream, gray, navy, black. Nothing bright or cheerful. Nothing that suggested joy or freedom or choice. I dressed in a simple black dress and returned to examining my prison. The bedroom held clues if I looked carefully. Books on the shelves, architecture manuals, Italian literature, psychology texts. All first editions, all arranged alphabetically. A desk positioned to catch the morning light, equipped with expensive pens and leather journals, but no computer, no phone, nothing that could connect me to the outside world. And on the wall opposite the bed, a painting that made my breath catch. It was abstract, all harsh slashes of red and black, but something about it felt violent, anguished, deeply personal. No artist's signature, which meant Glauco had either commissioned it privately or... The door opened without warning. Glauco entered carrying a tray, which surprised me. I'd expected him to send Arya or another servant. "You should eat," he said, setting the tray on the desk. "Arya says you refused lunch." I wasn't hungry. A lie. I was starving, but accepting food felt like accepting this situation, and I wasn't ready for that yet. Hunger strikes are tedious and ineffective. He lifted the silver dome covering the plate, revealing pasta, simple cacio e pepe, the scent of pecorino and black pepper making my stomach clench with need. "Eat, Amalia. Defiance through self-harm only punishes you." Is that what you want? For me to just accept this? To eat your food and wear your clothes and play whatever role you've designed for me in your revenge plot? He regarded me with that same clinical assessment. What I want is irrelevant. This is what's happening. You can fight it and exhaust yourself, or you can adapt and survive. Those are your only options. There's always another option. You mean suicide? His voice remained conversational. The windows don't open. There's nothing in this room you could use to harm yourself effectively, and Arya checks on you every 2 hours. If you're considering that particular escape, abandon it. I've invested too much to lose you to something as wasteful as self-destruction. The casual way he discussed it, as though my life or death was simply another variable in his architectural planning, made rage flare hot in my chest. "You're a monster," I said. "Yes," he agreed without hesitation. "But I'm a monster who will keep you fed, clothed, safe, and alive. Can you say the same about your parents? About the men who would have bought you if I hadn't?" The question landed like a blow because he was right. My parents had sold me to the highest bidder without considering what that buyer might do with his purchase. At least Glauco was honest about his monstrosity. I crossed to the desk and picked up the fork, spearing pasta with more force than necessary. His satisfaction at my capitulation was barely visible, just a slight relaxation in his shoulders. But I saw it. "Good," he said. "Tomorrow, we begin your education. You'll learn the layout of this villa, the rules that govern it, and the names and faces of the men who will eventually see you and understand what your presence here means." "Which is?" "That I've claimed a Moretti." He moved toward the door, then paused. "That painting you were examining, I made it. The night I learned what your grandfather had done to my family. I was 13 years old, and I spent 3 hours throwing paint at canvas, trying to externalize rage that had nowhere else to go. The confession was unexpected, vulnerable in a way nothing else about him had been. Why keep it? To remember. His hand rested on the doorknob. To never forget what I'm owed. Your grandfather took everything from me. My family, my childhood, my ability to trust anyone outside these walls. 20 years I've spent building toward this moment, and you, Amalia Moretti, are the final piece. Of your revenge. Of my justice. He opened the door. Sleep. Tomorrow begins your transformation from a girl who was sold into a weapon I'll use to destroy everyone who destroyed me. After he left, I ate the pasta mechanically, tasting nothing, and tried not to think about what it meant to be someone's weapon. But as I lay in that too-soft bed, watching moonlight paint silver patterns on the ceiling, I couldn't stop my mind from cataloging details. The painting that revealed pain beneath Glauco's control, the restored fiat that suggested sentimentality, survived somewhere in his architect's heart. The fact that he'd come himself to bring me food, that he'd bothered to explain rather than simply commanding obedience. These were vulnerabilities, I realized. Small cracks in the fortress he'd built around himself. And if I was going to survive this, if I was going to be more than just a tool in his hands, I needed to understand not just the rules he'd imposed, but the man who'd created them. Because Glauco de Laurentiis might have bought my body, but he hadn't purchased my mind. And while he was busy teaching me his rules, I would be learning his weaknesses. The game had begun. He just didn't know I was playing yet. The morning light woke me, streaming through those beautiful, unopenable windows, like a reminder that even the sun was complicit in my captivity. Arya appeared at exactly 7 o'clock, as I would learn she did every morning, carrying espresso and fresh cornetti that filled the room with the scent of butter and comfort I didn't deserve to feel. "Signor de Laurentiis expects you in his study in 30 minutes, she said, setting the tray on the bedside table. Her eyes lingered on me with something that might have been sympathy. Wear the gray dress, hair pulled back, no jewelry. Why no jewelry? Today you learned to disappear. She turned toward the door, then hesitated. Signorina, a word of advice. Don't ask him about his family. Don't mention the fire. Don't speak unless he invites it. These are the rules that keep you safe here. After she left, I followed her instructions, choosing the prescribed gray dress, expensive silk that whispered against my skin, and pulling my dark hair into a severe bun that made me look older, more anonymous. The mirror showed me a stranger, a ghost in expensive clothing, exactly what Arya had said I needed to become. Glauco's study was on the 3rd floor, accessed through a private elevator that required a key card I didn't possess. Arya escorted me, her hand light on my elbow, and left me at the heavy wooden door carved with geometric patterns that probably held some architectural significance I couldn't decipher. Enter. Glauco's voice responded to my knock. The study was all dark wood and leather, floor-to-ceiling bookshelves holding volumes in Italian, English, French, and what looked like Russian. Architectural models covered a massive table near the windows, buildings in various stages of conceptual development, miniature cities he could control and perfect before attempting them in reality. He sat behind a desk that looked like it had been carved from a single piece of walnut, wearing a charcoal suit that somehow made him look more dangerous than the casual clothes I'd glimpsed when he brought me food last night. His gray eyes lifted from the documents he was reviewing and assessed me with clinical precision. Good, he said. You can follow instructions. That's a start. What am I supposed to call you? The question emerged before I could stop it. Signor de Laurentiis, sir, master. His lips curved in something that wasn't quite a smile. Glauco is fine when we're alone. In front of others, you'll use whatever title the situation demands. But here, in private, I'm just the man who owns you. The casual cruelty should have stopped affecting me, but it still landed like a blade between my ribs. Sit. He gestured to a leather chair across from his desk. Your education begins with understanding exactly what you are to me. Not a mistress. I have no interest in forcing myself on an unwilling woman. Not a servant. I have Arya and Tommaso and others for menial tasks. You, Amalia, are a symbol. A walking reminder to everyone in my world that I've claimed a Moretti, that I possess what your family thought they could trade away and forget. A trophy. A message. He opened a folder and slid it across the desk. Inside were photographs, old, some in black and white, others in the faded colors of 1990s film stock. A family. Parents who looked happy, 2 boys and a girl clustered around what must have been a younger Glauco. maybe 10 years old, all of them laughing at some shared joke the camera had captured. "This is what your grandfather destroyed," Glauco said, his voice dropping to something colder. My father, Dante de Laurentiis, was a builder like me. Not architecture. He worked construction, honest labor, sending money back to family in Calabria. My mother, Elena, cleaned houses for wealthy families. We weren't rich, but we were happy, content. His finger traced the edge of a photograph showing the entire family at a beach, the same beach I could see from my window. My older brother, Luca, wanted to be a doctor. My sister, Sofia, studied piano. My younger brother, Marco, was only 6 years old. What happened to them? Your grandfather happened. Glauco closed the folder with deliberate care. My father witnessed something. A meeting between Lorenzo Moretti and leaders of the Conte family, our region's most powerful crime organization. Just saw them together, nothing more. But Lorenzo decided that even the possibility of testimony was too risky. He sold my father's name, our address, our entire family's location to the Contis for 3 million euros. My stomach twisted. And they burned our house while we slept, or tried to. I woke to smoke and Sofia screaming. Managed to get her and Marco out through a window before the flames reached our room. But Luca was already gone, overcome by smoke. My parents were trapped in their bedroom. His voice remained clinical, narrating horror like it was an architectural problem to be solved. I watched our house burn with my family inside while Sofia cried, and Marco asked when Mama was coming out. Jesus. The word escaped me like a prayer. Sofia died 3 months later. Pneumonia, the doctor said, but it was really the smoke damage to her lungs. Marco survived another year before a car accident. No witnesses, no explanation, just a child who'd seen too much ending up dead on a road outside Salerno. He looked up at me, and I saw nothing in his eyes, just calculation and cold certainty. I was 13 years old, and suddenly I was alone with nothing but 3 million euros. The blood money Lorenzo Moretti received, which his family had to pay to me in restitution when the courts connected him to the Conte family. Guilt money, they called it, an inheritance built on ashes. I'm sorry. The words felt absurdly inadequate. I don't want your apology, Amalia. I want your obedience. He stood, moving to the windows, his broad shoulders blocking the sunlight. I took that 3 million and I built an empire. Studied architecture, started designing buildings for the same wealthy families who'd destroyed mine, made myself indispensable, untouchable. Every structure I created, every fortune I earned, all of it serving one purpose, to reach the point where I could afford you. Why me specifically? Why not just... I didn't know how to finish the sentence. Why not just kill my father? Why not burn my family's house the way yours burned? Why buy me instead of simply destroying everyone connected to Lorenzo Moretti? Because your grandfather is already dead, Glauco said, turning to face me. Heart attack, 8 years ago. Your father, Antonio, spent the blood money on gambling and social climbing, making himself visible and vulnerable, but not worth the effort of direct revenge. But you. His gaze traveled over me, assessing. You're the first Moretti in 2 generations worth anything. University degree, legitimate career prospects, actually making something of yourself despite your family's corruption. Taking you sends a message that simply killing your father wouldn't achieve. What message? That I can reach into their world and extract what they value most. That no amount of legitimacy or distance protects them from what they owe me. He crossed back to his desk, pressing a button that made a screen descend from the ceiling. Now, your education. These are the faces you need to learn. The screen flickered to life, displaying photographs of men in expensive suits, their names and titles appearing beneath each image. Roberto Castellano, Marco Conte, Giuseppe Romano. Names I recognized from news reports, society pages, the upper echelons of southern Italy's interwoven legitimate and criminal power structures. These men attended the auction, Glauco continued. They saw me buy you. Within 24 hours, word spread through every family from Naples to Palermo that Glauco de Laurentiis has claimed a Moretti. Some understand the significance immediately, others are still piecing it together. But all of them are watching, waiting to see what I'll do with you. And what will you do with me? Display you. He advanced the slides, showing images of various social events, galas, charity functions, private dinners. You'll appear at my side at carefully selected occasions. You'll wear clothes I provide, speak words I script, exist as a constant reminder of what I've taken. Every man who sees you will understand the message. Glauco de Laurentiis doesn't forget debts, and he always collects. I'm not doing this. I stood, anger overriding caution. I won't be your performing monkey. He was across the room before I'd finished the sentence, his hand gripping my wrist. Not painfully, but with enough force to communicate absolute control. His face was inches from mine, and I could smell that expensive cologne mixed with something uniquely him. You will, he said quietly, his gray eyes holding mine, because the alternative is that I return you to your parents with a note explaining that you're defective merchandise. And we both know what men like Roberto Castellano do with defective purchases. They dispose of them. At least here, under my control, you're protected, valuable, alive. This isn't protection, I whispered. This is torture. It's both. His thumb pressed against my pulse point, and I knew he could feel my heart racing. I won't lie to you, Amalia. I bought you to serve a purpose that benefits me, not you. But in the process, I will keep you safer than you've ever been. You'll eat better than you did in Rome, sleep in comfort your student apartment never offered, learn things most people never access. All I ask in return is your obedience and your presence when I require it. And if I refuse? His grip tightened fractionally. Then I'll find other ways to motivate you. I'm creative when necessary. We stood there, locked in that intimate proximity, his hand on my wrist and his eyes boring into mine. Heat radiated off him, and I hated that my body responded to his nearness, even as my mind recoiled from his casual cruelty. Let me go, I said. No. But he released my wrist, stepping back with deliberate control. That's the lesson, Amalia. I decide when to hold and when to release. I decide what you wear, where you go, who you speak to. The sooner you accept that, the easier this becomes. I wanted to fight, to rage, to throw his photographs and his plans and his cold certainty back in his face. But Aria's words echoed in my mind. These are the rules that keep you safe here. And beneath Glauco's architectural precision, I'd glimpsed something else in those old photographs. Pain that even 20 years hadn't healed. A 13-year-old boy who'd lost everything and built himself into a fortress so no one could hurt him again. If I was going to survive this, if I was going to be more than just his weapon, I needed to understand the architecture of his control. Every fortress had weaknesses. Every design had flaws. I just had to find them. What happens now? I asked, keeping my voice steady. Now you study. He returned to his desk, that momentary intensity vanishing behind professional distance. You'll memorize these faces, these names, these relationships. Tomorrow I'll test your knowledge. The next day, we'll practice your public persona, and next week, you'll attend your first event with me, a charity gala where everyone who matters will see exactly what I've claimed. And you'll keep calling it that, claiming me, like I'm territory you've conquered. Aren't you? He didn't look up from his documents. Your parents sold you. The auction delivered you. I paid for you. Legal ownership, Amalia, documented in binding. You're mine in every way that matters in this world. Except one, I said, surprising myself with the boldness. You said you wouldn't force yourself on an unwilling woman. That's the one piece of me you don't own. Finally, he looked up, and something flickered in his gray eyes. Interest, perhaps, or challenge accepted. Yet. The word hung between us, weighted with promise and threat in equal measure. That will never happen, I said, needing to establish this boundary even as every other wall had been breached. His smile was slow, dangerous, and utterly certain. We'll see. You're not the first person to underestimate what I can achieve when I set my mind to it. Now sit down and start memorizing. Your education has only just begun. I sat because I had no choice, but as I stared at those photographs of powerful men who'd watched me being sold, I made myself a promise. Glauco de Laurentiis might have bought my body, might have trapped me in his beautiful prison, might have claimed ownership of my present and immediate future. But my mind remained my own. And while he was busy turning me into his weapon, I would be learning his weaknesses, mapping the architecture of his control, and planning for the day when I could redesign this prison from the inside out. The game had rules. I just needed to learn them well enough to break them. The dress arrived 3 days before the event, delivered in a box lined with tissue paper so fine it dissolved under my fingers like snow. Midnight blue silk that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, with a neckline that would reveal my collarbone and the hollow of my throat without exposing too much. Elegant, expensive, designed to make me look like I belonged at Glauco's side without outshining him. Perfect fit, Arya murmured, as she helped me into it for the initial try-on. Signor de Laurentiis has an excellent eye. He seems to have an excellent everything. I tried to keep the bitterness from my voice, but failed. 3 weeks had passed since the auction. 3 weeks of memorizing faces and names, practicing the art of being present but invisible, learning to speak when spoken to, and disappear into expensive backgrounds when not needed. The villa had become familiar, even as it remained a prison. I knew every room I was permitted to access, every window that wouldn't open, every camera angle that tracked my movements through corridors and spaces. But I'd also started to notice the things Glauco probably didn't realize he was revealing. The way he paused at the painting I'd noticed in my room, his painting, whenever he passed it in the hallway. The old Fiat in the garage that he'd sometimes sit in for hours, just sitting, not driving, as though proximity to his mother's memory was a form of prayer. The single photograph he kept on his desk of a young girl at a piano, fingers poised over keys she'd never play again. These were the cracks in his fortress. Small, barely visible, but there. Remember, Glauco said the morning of the gala, summoning me to his study for final instructions. You're there to be seen, not heard. If someone asks you questions, deflect to me. If someone tries to engage you in private conversation, remain polite but distant. You represent my claim, nothing more. Your symbol, I recited, the words bitter on my tongue. Your message to the men who destroyed your family. Something flickered in his expression. Approval, perhaps, that I'd understood the lesson so thoroughly. Exactly. Tonight, every person in that ballroom will see you and understand what it means that a De Laurentiis possesses a Moretti. Possesses. I met his gaze steadily. You keep using that word. Because it's accurate. He stood, circling his desk to stand before me, close enough that I had to tilt my head back to maintain eye contact. You belong to me, Amalia. Your presence in my home, at my side, wearing my clothes and eating my food, all of it declares ownership. Why does that word bother you so much? Because I'm not a thing to be owned. In this world, everyone is owned by someone. Your parents owned you until they sold you. I own you now. The only difference is that I'm honest about it, His hand came up, fingers tracing the curve of my jaw with unexpected gentleness. And I take care of what I own. I should have pulled away from his touch, should have maintained the distance I'd been carefully constructing during our daily lessons. But something about the warmth of his fingers against my skin, the way his gray eyes had softened fractionally, made me freeze. "Is that what this is?" I asked quietly. "Taking care of me? Dressing me up to parade in front of your enemies?" "Yes." His thumb brushed across my lower lip, the gesture intimate despite its casualness. "Because every man in that ballroom who sees you, who recognizes the Moretti features in your face, will also see that you're untouchable. Mine. Any attempt to harm you harms me, and no one dares that. You're safer as my possession than you ever were as your parents' daughter." The logic was twisted, but I couldn't deny its truth. In the 3 weeks since he'd bought me, I'd been fed better, housed better, treated with more care than my parents had shown in years. Glauco might call it ownership, but it looked suspiciously like protection. "Why do you care if I'm safe?" The question emerged before I could stop it. If I'm just a symbol, a message to your enemies, I'm replaceable. Any Moretti would serve the same purpose. His hand stilled on my face, his expression shifting to something I couldn't quite read. "Are you really that blind to your own value?" "My value?" I almost laughed. "I was sold for €2 million to the highest bidder. My family couldn't wait to be rid of me. What value could I possibly have beyond the name I was born with?" Glauco was silent for a long moment, his hand still cupping my face as though he could communicate through touch what words couldn't express. Then he stepped back, that professional distance reasserting itself. "Get ready," he said, his voice neutral again. "The car leaves at 7. The Palazzo Reale in Naples had been transformed for the charity gala, its Baroque opulence polished to mirror shine. Chandeliers dripped crystal light over marble floors where Italy's elite circulated in designer clothes, worth more than most people's annual salaries. I recognized faces from the photographs I'd memorized. Roberto Castellano with his cold smile and calculating eyes, Marco Conte who'd bid against Glauco at the auction, women dripping with jewelry that probably financed arms deals and drug shipments. Glauco's hand was firm on the small of my back as we entered, his touch communicating ownership and protection simultaneously. I'd learned to read his body language over the past 3 weeks, the tension in his shoulders when someone he particularly despised approached, the fractional softening when he looked at architectural details he appreciated, the absolute stillness that meant he was calculating several moves ahead in whatever game he was playing. "Glauco!" A booming voice cut through the polite murmur. "I heard rumors you'd taken a companion, but I didn't believe it until now." Antonio Ricci, owner of half of Naples' luxury hotels, and, according to my studies, a man who'd profited from the same Conte family contracts that had killed Glauco's family. His gaze swept over me with undisguised appreciation that made my skin crawl. "Antonio." Glauco's voice was cordial but cool. "May I present Amalia Moretti? Amalia, this is Antonio Ricci." The way he said my surname, weighted with significance, made Antonio's eyes widen fractionally. "Moretti? As in Lorenzo Moretti?" "His granddaughter," Glauco confirmed, his hand tightening possessively on my waist. "A fortunate acquisition." "Acquisition." Antonio's smile didn't reach his eyes. "I see. And how does Antonio Moretti feel about his daughter being acquired?" "I imagine he's relieved to have his debt settled." Glauco's tone made it clear this line of questioning was over. "If you'll excuse us, I need to introduce Amalia to the evening's hosts." We moved through the crowd, and I felt eyes following us, heard whispers that confirmed Glauco's intentions were working perfectly. The message was being received. He'd claimed a Moretti, making visible what should have remained hidden, forcing everyone to acknowledge debts and histories they'd prefer to forget. "You're doing well," Glauco murmured, as we paused near one of the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Bay of Naples. Your posture is perfect, your expression appropriately neutral. You've learned the role. I'm a quick study, I said, accepting the champagne flute he pressed into my hand. For show only. He'd instructed me not to actually drink, to maintain perfect control at all times. Yes, you are. Something in his tone made me look up at him, and I found him studying me with that clinical assessment I'd come to recognize. You're smarter than I initially calculated, more observant. You see patterns most people miss. The compliment, unexpected and backhanded, made heat rise to my cheeks. Is that a problem? On the contrary. His lips curved in a slight smile. It makes you more valuable. A mindless symbol would serve my immediate purpose, but an intelligent one. That has possibilities I hadn't fully considered. Before I could ask what he meant, a woman's voice cut through our conversation. Glauco, darling, you've been hiding from me all evening. She was beautiful in the way poisonous things are beautiful. Perfectly styled dark hair, a crimson dress that clung to curves sculpted by expensive surgeons, and eyes that held the sharp calculation of someone who'd learned to weaponize her appearance. I recognized her from my studies. Isabella Conti, daughter of Marco Conte, the man who'd ordered Glauco's family killed. Isabella, Glauco's voice was absolutely neutral. I wasn't aware you'd be attending. Daddy insisted. Her gaze slid to me, dismissive and assessing in equal measure. And who's this? A new project? Amalia Moretti. Glauco said my name like a weapon. Amalia, this is Isabella Conti. The surname landed between us like a blade. Isabella's perfect composure cracked fractionally, just enough for me to see genuine surprise followed by rapid calculation. Moretti, she repeated slowly, as in the family that. She trailed off, realization dawning. Oh, Glauco, even for you this is twisted. Is it? His hand on my waist was possessive steel. I simply acquired something of value, no different than your family's various acquisitions over the years. The reference to the Conte family's criminal enterprises made Isabella's eyes narrow. Careful, darling. These games have a way of ending badly for everyone involved. I don't play games, Isabella. I execute plans. He steered me away before she could respond, his hand tight enough now that I knew I'd have finger-shaped bruises tomorrow. Are you okay? I asked quietly, as we moved to a less crowded corner of the ballroom. Why wouldn't I be? His voice was clipped, controlled, but I'd learned to read the tension in his shoulders. Because you just came face to face with the daughter of the man who killed your family, and you had to be polite about it. He looked at me then, and something raw flickered in his gray eyes before he locked it down. This is the world we live in, Amalia. The people who destroyed everything I loved attend the same parties I do, drink the same expensive wine, pretend we're all civilized, and I smile and play along because open warfare would be inefficient. So you use me instead. Understanding crystallized. I'm not just a message to random observers. I'm a message to her family. A reminder that you haven't forgotten, that you're patient enough to wait decades for the right moment to strike back. Now you're beginning to understand. His hand gentled on my waist, the punishing grip easing. Every person here tonight who sees you with me understands a fraction of what's really happening. But Isabella, she sees the full picture. She knows exactly what it means that I've claimed a Moretti. What does it mean? His smile was cold and absolutely certain. That I'm coming for everything her family took from mine, and I'm patient enough to make them watch me build toward it, piece by piece, acquisition by acquisition, until the moment I decide to execute my final design. We stood there in that corner of Baroque opulence, surrounded by Italy's elite, and I finally understood the true scope of what Glauco had created. Not just a personal prison for me, but an architectural masterpiece of revenge so complex and long-term, that most people would never see the complete structure until it collapsed around them. I'm not just bait, I said slowly. I'm a foundation stone in something much larger. Yes, his hand moved from my waist to tangle briefly in my fingers, a gesture almost tender despite its possessiveness. You're the visible piece that makes everyone look at what I want them to see, while I finish building what they can't see yet. And when you're done building, what happens to me then? The question hung between us, weighted with genuine uncertainty. Glauco's carefully constructed plans clearly extended years into the future. But did those plans include me beyond my symbolic value? That depends, he said finally, his gray eyes holding mine with uncomfortable intensity. On what? On whether you're content being a symbol, or whether you want to be an architect in your own right. Before I could process what that meant, music swelled through the ballroom, the opening notes of a waltz. Glauco's hand tightened on mine. Dance with me, he said, not a request. I don't know how to waltz. Then follow my lead. It's what you've been doing for 3 weeks anyway. He pulled me onto the dance floor before I could protest, one hand firm at my waist, the other holding mine with practiced grace. And as he guided me through steps I barely knew, I realized this was another test, another lesson in the education he'd been conducting. Trust his lead or stumble. Follow his control or fall. Exist within the parameters he set or fail publicly in front of everyone watching. But as we moved together across that polished floor, his body warm against mine and his eyes holding mine with unwavering focus, I felt something shift between us. The careful distance I'd been maintaining, the walls I'd built against his control, began to crack. Because despite everything, despite being bought and imprisoned and used as a weapon in his revenge, I couldn't deny the electricity when he touched me, the way my pulse quickened when he looked at me, the traitorous heat that pooled in my stomach when his hand tightened possessively on my waist. You're thinking too hard, he murmured, his lips close to my ear. I can see it in your face. Just feel the music, Amalia. Let yourself exist in this moment instead of analyzing it. I can't stop analyzing, I admitted. It's how I survive. I know. His hand moved to the small of my back, pulling me fractionally closer. You and I are more alike than you want to admit. Both of us trapped by what was done to us. Both of us calculating every interaction, trusting no one. But right now, in this moment, you're safe. I'm not going to let anything happen to you. You're the thing happening to me, I pointed out. His laugh was quiet, genuine, the first real laugh I'd heard from him. Fair point. But I'm also the thing protecting you from everything else. Doesn't that count for something? The waltz ended before I could answer, but as Glauco led me off the dance floor, his hand still possessive on my waist, I couldn't stop thinking about his question. Did it count? Did protection matter if it came wrapped in control? Could I feel safe with a man who'd bought me, even as he kept me safer than I'd ever been? The night wore on. More introductions, more carefully scripted conversations, more eyes assessing me and drawing their own conclusions about what my presence meant. And through it all, Glauco remained at my side, his hand always touching me somewhere, waist, elbow, shoulder. A constant physical reminder of ownership that was starting to feel less like imprisonment and more like something else, something dangerous, something I couldn't afford to feel. The morning after the gala, I woke to find Glauco sitting in the armchair near my window, backlit by Mediterranean sunrise, watching me sleep. That's disturbing, I said, pulling the sheets higher despite being fully clothed in the silk pajamas Arya had laid out. Is it? He didn't apologize or move, just continued studying me with that clinical intensity. I wanted to see you when you didn't know you were being observed. People reveal more in unguarded moments. And what did I reveal? That you talk in your sleep. A slight smile curved his lips. In Italian, no less, though your accent needs work. Something about architecture and broken foundations. Heat flooded my cheeks. I'd been dreaming about his revenge structure, trying to map its complete design, identifying potential weaknesses. Of course, I'd talk through the analysis aloud. I can't control what I say when I'm unconscious, I said defensively. No, but it's illuminating nonetheless. He stood, moving to the edge of my bed with that fluid grace that reminded me he'd probably trained in something. Martial arts, maybe. Or dance. Last night went well. You performed exactly as instructed. Several people have already contacted me about you, wanting to know more. Should I feel accomplished that I successfully played puppet? You should feel successful that you're learning to navigate this world on its own terms. He sat on the edge of the mattress, close enough that I could smell his cologne. Something expensive and woody that I'd grown familiar with over the past weeks. But there's been a complication. My stomach clenched. What kind of complication? Your father. Glauco's expression was unreadable. He's demanding to see you. Claims I've imprisoned you illegally, that the sale wasn't valid, that he wants his daughter back. The laugh that escaped me was bitter. 3 weeks ago, he couldn't wait to sell me. Now he wants me back? Let me guess. He ran through the $2 million already and thinks he can renegotiate. Astute. Glauco's hand came to rest on the bed near my hip, not quite touching but close enough to make me hyper-aware of his presence. The money is gone. Gambling debts, bad investments, maintaining the lifestyle he's grown accustomed to. And now he's realized that having you in my possession gives me leverage over him that he didn't anticipate. What kind of leverage? The kind that comes from everyone now knowing a De Laurentiis owns a Moretti. Your father's business associates, his social connections, all of them are asking questions about why he sold his daughter to me specifically. Some are beginning to piece together the history, to remember the massacre 20 years ago. His gray eyes held mine. Your presence in my home is making him look either complicit or stupid, and Antonio Moretti's ego can't tolerate either interpretation. So what happens now? That depends on you. He shifted closer, and I felt the mattress dip under his weight. I could refuse to see him, which would escalate the situation and potentially force him to take legal action. Or I could allow a meeting, let you see for yourself what he really wants. But if we do the latter, you need to understand something crucial. What? His hand finally made contact, fingers wrapping around my wrist where my pulse hammered against his touch. If you tell him you want to leave, if you claim I'm holding you against your will, I'll have to release you. Italian law is clear on that point, regardless of what contracts were signed. Your testimony supersedes everything. My breath caught. You're saying I could leave right now if I wanted to? I'm saying the cage door was never locked the way you thought it was. His thumb pressed against my racing pulse. I bought you legally, Amalia. Your parents signed papers transferring guardianship, yes. But you're an adult woman, and if you claim duress or coercion, those papers become worthless. You could walk out of here today, and I couldn't legally stop you. The revelation should have filled me with relief, with the rush of realizing freedom was available. Instead, I felt strangely hollow. Why are you telling me this? Because I want you to choose to stay. His voice dropped to something rawer, more honest than anything I'd heard from him before. I want you to understand that every day you remain here is a choice you're making, not something I'm forcing on you. You're not my prisoner, Amalia. You're my... You're what? I prompted when he trailed off. He was silent for a long moment, his hand still circling my wrist, his gray eyes searching mine as though trying to decode a structure he couldn't quite understand. I don't know yet, he admitted finally. That's the problem. You were supposed to be a tool, a symbol, a weapon I could wield against my enemies. but somewhere between the auction and now, you've become something more complicated. Complicated how? Instead of answering, he leaned closer, his free hand coming up to cup my face with unexpected gentleness. Let me show you something. He stood, pulling me with him, and led me through the villa's corridors to a room I'd never been permitted to enter. His private suite. The space was minimalist like the rest of the villa, but personal in a way the public areas weren't. Architectural models covered every surface, buildings in various stages of completion. And on one wall, a massive corkboard held photographs connected by red string, names and dates scrawled in his precise handwriting. "This is my revenge structure," he said, gesturing to the board. 20 years of planning, every connection mapped, every debt calculated. The Conte family here, he indicated a cluster of photos centered on Marco Conte. The Moretti family here. Your grandfather Lorenzo at the center, the foundation of everything that destroyed my family. I studied the board, recognizing faces from the gala, from my studies, from news reports. It was comprehensive, obsessive, the work of someone who dedicated his entire adult life to a single purpose. "Where am I?" I asked, scanning for my photo. "That's the problem." He moved to stand beside me, so close our shoulders brushed. "You don't fit in the architecture anymore. You were supposed to slot in here," he indicated a space near my father's photo. "A tool to expose Antonio Moretti's guilt by association, to make everyone remember what Lorenzo did. But now," he pulled a photograph from his pocket, one taken of us at the gala, dancing, my face tilted up toward his with an expression I hadn't realized I was making. Something soft, almost trusting, completely at odds with the fear I'd felt those first weeks. "Now you're here," he said quietly, and pinned the photo not near my father, but in a completely different section of the board. Separate, distinct, connected to him rather than to the revenge structure. "I don't understand." "Neither do I." He turned to face me fully, his hands coming to rest on my shoulders. "I bought you to use against your family, but somewhere in the process of teaching you to be my weapon, I started wanting you for reasons that have nothing to do with revenge. And that's problematic." My heart hammered against my ribs. "Why problematic?" "Because wanting something for its own sake, rather than its strategic value, is a weakness I can't afford." His hands tightened slightly. "Because the moment I start caring about you beyond your utility is the moment I become vulnerable. And I haven't survived this long by being vulnerable." Maybe vulnerability isn't the same as weakness, I heard myself say, the words emerging before I'd fully thought them through. Maybe it's just honesty about what you're actually feeling instead of what you've calculated you should feel. His laugh was quiet, almost bitter. "And what are you feeling, Amalia? When you look at me, what do you see?" The question demanded honesty, and I found myself giving it despite every self-protective instinct screaming at me to lie. "I see the man who bought me," I said slowly. "The man who trapped me in this beautiful prison and forced me to become his symbol. But I also see the 13-year-old boy who watched his family burn, who spent 20 years building armor so thick that nothing could hurt him again. I see someone brilliant and broken, and so focused on revenge that he's forgotten what it feels like to just exist without a calculated purpose." His hand slid from my shoulders to cup my face, and the tenderness in the gesture made my breath catch. "And how does that make you feel?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Terrified," I admitted. "Because despite everything you've done, despite knowing exactly what you are and what you want from me, I'm starting to care about you anyway. And that's the worst kind of Stockholm Syndrome, isn't it? When you can't tell the difference between survival instinct and actual feeling." Or maybe, his forehead came to rest against mine, it's just honesty breaking through the architecture we've both built to protect ourselves. We stood there, balanced on the edge of something neither of us had planned for, his breath warm against my lips and his hands gentle on my face. All he'd have to do was close the distance, and a sharp knock shattered the moment. Glauco stepped back immediately, that professional distance reasserting itself even as his eyes held a heat that betrayed how much the interruption cost him. Yes. His voice was controlled again, the vulnerability of seconds ago locked away. Signore, Tommaso's voice came through the door. Antonio Moretti is here demanding to see his daughter. Glauco's expression hardened. Tell him we'll meet in the formal sitting room in 10 minutes. He turned back to me. Time to choose, Amalia. You can tell him you want to leave and I'll let you go. Or you can tell him the truth, that you're here because you choose to be. But either way, the decision has to be yours. And if I choose to stay? Something fierce flashed in his gray eyes. Then we stop pretending this is just about revenge, and we figure out what it's really about, together. The choice should have been obvious. Freedom over captivity, escape over entrapment. But as I looked at Glauco, at the vulnerability he'd shown me, at the revenge structure that had consumed his entire adult life, I realized the answer was more complicated than I'd thought. Because somewhere between being bought and learning to navigate his world, between resenting his control and understanding his pain, I'd started to become complicit in his architecture. Not just as a tool, but as someone who saw the blueprint and wanted to help him redesign it. I'll tell my father the truth, I said finally. That I'm staying because I choose to. Not because you're forcing me, but because this is where I want to be right now. The relief that crossed Glauco's face was brief but unmistakable. You understand what that means? That everyone will think you've chosen your captor over your family? Let them think what they want. I lifted my chin. They sold me. You bought me. But I'm the only one who gets to decide what I'm worth and what I'm willing to do with that value. So yes, I choose to stay. Not as your prisoner, but as whatever complicated thing we're becoming. His hand found mine, fingers tangling together with the same possessive gentleness he'd shown moments ago. Then let's go face your father. And after he's gone, we'll talk about what happens next. About redesigning this structure we're trapped in together. As we walked through the villa toward the formal sitting room where my father waited, I felt the last of my resistance crumble. I was Glauco de Laurentiis' weapon, his symbol, his, what had he called it? Complication. But I was also my own person, making my own choices, even when those choices led me deeper into a beautiful, dangerous maze that I was starting to suspect I never wanted to escape from at all. The game had changed, and I was no longer just a piece being moved across his board. I was beginning to understand the rules well enough to make my own moves. My father looked smaller than I remembered. He sat in one of the formal sitting room's leather chairs, his expensive suit unable to hide the strain around his eyes. The way his hands trembled slightly as he gripped a coffee cup that Aria had surely provided with instructions from Glauco to be polite, but distant. Antonio Moretti had aged a decade in 3 weeks. Amalia. He stood when we entered, his eyes widening at the sight of me in the elegant cream dress Glauco had selected that morning, cashmere that whispered against my skin, expensive enough to make a statement. Tesoro. Are you all right? Has he hurt you? Sit down, Antonio. Glauco's voice was controlled but hard. Your daughter is perfectly fine, as you can see. Fine? My father's voice rose. She's been imprisoned here for 3 weeks. I want her returned to me immediately. Do you? I found my voice before Glauco could respond. Do you really want me back, Papa? Or do you want the leverage you've realized I represent? My father's face flushed. Kara, you don't understand what you're saying. This man has clearly manipulated you, made you think that you sold me. I crossed to stand near the windows, needing distance from both men. That you took 2 million euros and signed papers transferring your parental rights without a second thought. No manipulation necessary for those facts, Papa. I was there. I remember exactly how eager you were to be rid of me. I had debts. You had choices, I interrupted. You could have sold property, could have declared bankruptcy, could have done literally anything, except put your daughter on an auction block like livestock. So don't stand there pretending this sudden concern for my welfare is about anything other than saving face now that everyone knows what you did. The silence that followed my words was thick enough to touch. My father sank back into his chair, his face gray. You don't know what you're saying, he said weakly. The stress, the isolation, it's affected your judgment. My judgment is clearer than it's ever been. I turned to face him fully. I'm staying here, Papa. Not because Senor De Laurentiis is forcing me, but because I choose to. Because in 3 weeks he's shown me more honesty and protection than you showed in 23 years. He bought you. My father's voice cracked. He's using you for some twisted revenge plot against our family. Yes, I agreed calmly. He is, and I'm allowing it because at least he's honest about what he wants from me. You pretended to be a father while planning to trade me away the moment it became convenient. I'll take honest exploitation over false love any day. Glauco had remained silent through this exchange, but I felt his presence behind me. Solid, supportive, letting me handle this confrontation in my own way, rather than controlling it. The realization made something warm bloom in my chest. Signor Moretti, Glauco said finally, his voice carrying the weight of finality. You've seen your daughter. You've confirmed she's alive, well treated, and here of her own free will. That satisfies any legal obligation I might have to permit this meeting. Now I suggest you leave before I decide to pursue legal remedies for the fraud you perpetrated in selling me defective merchandise. Defective? My father stood again, indignant. What are you talking about? You claimed she was a virgin. Glauco's hand came to rest possessively on my shoulder. You failed to mention she has a university degree, a sharp mind, and a willingness to speak her own mind. All qualities that make her far more valuable than the decorative symbol I thought I was purchasing, so perhaps I should be thanking you for the oversight. The casual claim of my virginity, something he had no way of knowing about and hadn't actually tested, made heat flood my cheeks. But I understood the strategy. He was marking territory, making my father understand that I was beyond his reach now in every possible way. Get out, Papa, I said quietly. Take your false concern and your guilty conscience and leave. You made your choice 3 weeks ago. Now live with it. My father looked between us, seeming to finally understand that this was a battle he'd already lost. Your mother will want to see you. He tried as a last desperate bid. Then she can call and request a visit through proper channels, Glauco replied. But I suspect she won't. Carlotta Moretti has never shown particular interest in her daughter beyond what was socially required. I imagine she's relieved to have the burden of Amalia removed from her social calendar. The accuracy of the observation, the cruel, precise truth of it, made my father flinch. Because we all knew it was right. My mother had been perfectly happy to see me sold if it meant maintaining her lifestyle. After my father left, escorted to his car by Tommaso with instructions never to return uninvited, Glauco and I stood in silence, looking out at the Mediterranean sparkling in the afternoon light. Thank you, I said finally. For what? For letting me handle that myself. For not controlling every word I said. His hand found mine, fingers tangling together with comfortable familiarity. You're not my puppet, Amalia. Never were, despite what I let you think those first weeks. I needed you to believe you were trapped, so you'd stop looking for exits and start seeing the structure I was actually building. Which is? He turned me to face him. both hands coming up to frame my face with that gentle possessiveness I'd come to crave despite myself. An empire where you're not a tool, but a partner. Where your intelligence and observation skills are assets I can deploy, not threats I need to contain. Partners in your revenge? Partners in everything. His thumb traced my lower lip. I want to teach you everything I know, Amalia. Architecture, strategy, how to read people and situations, how to build structures that last, and in return you'll teach me. Teach you what? His smile was self-deprecating. How to be human again. How to want something for its own sake rather than its strategic value. How to care about someone without calculating the return on investment. That's a tall order, I said, but I was smiling despite myself. You're up for it. He leaned closer, his breath warm against my lips. You've already started the work. Every time you challenge me, every time you refuse to simply accept what I tell you, you're chipping away at the armor I've built. And I'm starting to think that's exactly what I need. Glauco. He kissed me before I could finish the sentence, and unlike our earlier near misses, this was deliberate, intentional, a claiming that had nothing to do with revenge structures and everything to do with the complicated thing we'd been building between us. I melted into him, my hands fisting in his shirt, pulling him closer as heat pooled through my body. His arms came around me, holding me against him with a possessiveness that no longer felt like imprisonment, but like safety, like home, like something I'd been searching for without knowing it. When we finally broke apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against mine. I'm still using you, he said, honesty cutting through the tenderness. Isabella Conti and her family are planning something. My sources confirm it. And when they move, you'll be the bait that draws them out. That hasn't changed. I know, I said, and I'm choosing to be that bait. But on one condition. What condition? You stop calling it using me and start calling it us working together. I want to see the complete revenge structure, Glauco. Every piece, every connection, every plan you've built over 20 years. And I want to help you refine it, strengthen it, make sure that when you finally execute, nothing can go wrong. Something fierce and proud flashed in his gray eyes. You want to be my architect, not just my symbol. I want to be your equal. I held his gaze steadily. Partners in every sense. You teach me your world, and I'll help you redesign the parts that don't work anymore. Starting with the part where you pretend you don't care about anything except revenge. His kiss this time was softer, almost reverent. Deal. But, Amalia? Yes? This partnership we're building? It's going to get dangerous. The Conte family doesn't forgive or forget, and when they realize you're not just my possession but my ally, they'll come for you specifically. Are you sure you want that target on your back? I thought about my father's gray face, my mother's indifference, the auction block where I'd been sold like merchandise. Thought about the past 3 weeks learning Glauco's world, seeing the intricate structure of power and control he'd built, understanding that the only way to be safe in this world was to be powerful. I'm sure, I said. Teach me everything. Make me dangerous enough that they'll think twice about coming for me. And when the time comes to execute your revenge, I want to be standing beside you, not hidden safely away. The next 3 months transformed me in ways I couldn't have imagined. Glauco kept his promise, showing me not just the revenge structure, but the complete architecture of his empire. I learned how to read contracts for the clauses that mattered, how to spot lies in body language, how to navigate conversations with men who'd mastered the art of saying everything while revealing nothing. I studied architecture itself, understanding how Glauco's buildings were designed not just for beauty, but for defensibility, how every structure he created contained hidden strengths that would only become apparent when tested. And I learned about the Conte family. Really learned, beyond the surface, facts I'd memorized those first weeks. Marco Conte had ordered the hit on Glauco's family not for the $3 million Lorenzo Moretti paid him, but because Dante De Laurentiis had witnessed a meeting between the Contis and a rival family, a meeting that would have exposed Marco's plans to eliminate his own brother and take sole control of the organization. Lorenzo Moretti had simply provided the excuse Marco needed and collected blood money for information he would have provided anyway. "My grandfather was worse than I thought," I said, one evening, as Glauco and I reviewed documents in his study. Our study now. He'd had a second desk installed so I could work beside him. "Most people are," Glauco replied without looking up from the architectural plans he was reviewing. "That's why you build your structures expecting betrayal rather than hoping for loyalty." "Is that what you expected from me? Betrayal?" "At first." He finally looked up, his gray eyes holding mine across the space between our desks. "But you've proven yourself loyal in ways I didn't anticipate. You ask hard questions instead of pretending to understand. You challenge my plans when you see weaknesses instead of blindly following. That's more valuable than unthinking obedience. Because partners are more useful than pawns. Because partners make better architects." He stood, crossing to my desk and perching on its edge. "Come here. I want to show you something." I joined him at the massive table where he kept his models and found a new structure I hadn't seen before. A building that looked impossibly delicate, all glass and steel balanced on what appeared to be a single point. "What is it?" "Our next project." His hand settled at the small of my back. "A museum in Positano, funded by a charitable trust I've established. It will house artifacts and documents related to southern Italy's history, including comprehensive records of the Conte family's criminal activities over the past 40 years. My breath caught. "You're going to expose them publicly." "Better than that. I'm going to force them to fund their own exposure." His smile was cold and satisfied. "The charitable trust is administered by a board they control. They'll approve the museum construction because it makes them look philanthropic. And they won't realize until it opens that every document on display is authentic, verified, and legally protected as part of a historical archive they themselves endorsed." "That's brilliant," I said, studying the model with new understanding. "They can't destroy the evidence without destroying a public institution they're officially associated with. And any attempt to discredit the archive just brings more attention to what's being preserved." "Exactly." His arm came around my waist fully. "This is what I want to build with you, Amalia. Not just revenge, but something that lasts beyond the moment of payback. Structures that protect truth, that make it impossible for powerful families to simply erase their crimes from history." I turned in his arms, looking up at him. "You're not just getting revenge. You're trying to change the entire system that killed your family. One building at a time." He tucked a strand of hair behind my ear. "And having you as my partner makes me think bigger, plan further. You see possibilities I miss." "Like what?" "Like the fact that exposing the Conte family's crimes will create a power vacuum. Like the reality that someone will have to step in to fill that vacuum, to reorganize the legitimate business interests they'll have to abandon. Like the opportunity to reshape southern Italy's power structure into something less corrupt. You want to replace them." "I want to dismantle them and build something better in their place, using their own money, their own connections, their own carefully constructed legitimacy against them." His hands framed my face. "But that's a 20-year project minimum. Are you prepared for that? For building something that might not be complete in our lifetime?" The question should have overwhelmed me. I was 23 years old, and he was asking me to commit to a multi-decade conspiracy to reshape Italian organized crime through architectural planning and strategic philanthropy. But as I looked into his gray eyes, at the man who'd spent 20 years building toward revenge with patience and precision, I realized the answer was obvious. "Yes," I said simply. "I'm prepared. Teach me everything, Glauco. make me your equal in every sense. And then let's build an empire of silence so complete that when the Conte family finally falls, no one will even hear them scream. His kiss was fierce, claiming a promise and a sealing of our partnership. And as his hands tangled in my hair, and I pulled him closer, I understood that I'd finally found what I'd been searching for without knowing it. Not freedom from captivity, that had never really been the issue, but purpose, partnership, a place where my intelligence and observation skills weren't liabilities to be hidden, but weapons to be deployed. Glauco de Laurentiis had bought me as a tool for revenge, but somewhere in the process of using me, he'd taught me to see the complete architecture of power. And now I was redesigning that architecture alongside him, becoming not his weapon, but his equal partner, in a conspiracy so vast and patient that most people would never see it coming until the structures they'd relied on for decades collapsed around them. The Conti family had killed his family for 3 million euros. We would spend the next 20 years making them pay in ways they couldn't imagine, not through violence or obvious revenge, but through the slow, inevitable erosion of every foundation they'd built their empire on, using their own money, their own pride, their own assumption that they were untouchable to bring about their downfall. It was beautiful. It was ruthless. It was exactly the kind of revenge that required an architect's precision and a partner's trust. And as Glauco lifted me onto the model table, scattering miniature buildings as he claimed me with a hunger that had nothing to do with revenge and everything to do with the bond we'd forged, I knew I'd made the right choice. I was Amalia Moretti no longer. I was Amalia de Laurentiis in everything but legal name, the architect's partner, his equal, his weapon and his weakness, and his strength all at once. And together, we would build an empire of silence so perfect that when we finally spoke, when we finally revealed what we'd constructed in shadow and patience, the entire corrupt structure of Southern Italian power would have no choice but to crumble at our feet. The game was no longer his alone. It was ours, and we were just getting started.